Prince William doubles down. According to multiple sources, it's now a matter of when, not if, he strips Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of their royal title.
No, it definitely does not. We see this even reflected in Harry's cousins. So Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, they are not working royals, and yet they also have an HRH in front of their names. Obviously, we do have Prince Andrew, who still is not allowed to use his, much like Harry, but still technically holds an HRH status. And so really it's just a styling, but it does sort of mean something in the hierarchy of the royal sphere.
Something has shifted inside the British royal establishment quietly, deliberately, and with the kind of finality that those who know how the palace operates will instantly recognize. Prince Harry reportedly briefed a national newspaper with a plan where his 2 children would one day have the option to become working members of the royal family. Archie, just 6 years old, Lilibet, only 3, working royals. And the palace's response, relayed through friends of Prince William speaking to the Daily Beast, landed like a thunderclap. William's senior source said William despises Harry and Meghan at this stage, and that, when he is king, his fury will rain down on them. Those are not the words of a man still holding a door open. Those are the words of someone who has already made up his mind and is simply waiting for the right moment to strike.
William is planning to act very decisively when he becomes king to take away the titles, the HRHs, once and for all from all non-working royals, which will have the silver lining for him of removing them from Harry and Meghan.
Because what William is now reportedly planning, according to multiple sources with direct personal access to him, is not a conversation, not a negotiation, not an appeal to his brother's better nature. It is a legal move, new letters patent, issued by the king himself, stripping the HRH styling from the entire Sussex family permanently, completely, and with no road back. If those sources are right, and they speak with striking specificity, the question is no longer whether the Sussex children will ever be working royals. The real question is whether they will hold any royal title at all. To understand what this moment actually means, you need to understand what an HRH title is, and, just as importantly, what it is not. There is enormous confusion around this, some of it accidental, and some of it, those inside the institution would argue, very deliberately kept that way. Her Royal Highness, or His Royal Highness, is a style, a form of address, a courtesy granted by royal decree. It does not hand the holder a constitutional role.
I think people would applaud in the streets if it were to happen, because Harry and Meghan, especially Meghan, I think, she does not care about the royal family at all. The only thing she cares about is that she has a title she can lord over her famous friends, because she's not as rich or successful as them, but she does have a royal title, and that's all that matters to her.
It does not entitle anyone to public duties, palace support, or a seat inside the working monarchy. Beatrice and Eugenie hold HRH titles. They are not working royals. Prince Andrew technically still holds HRH status. He is absolutely not a working royal. The two things are completely separate, and the idea now apparently being pushed by Harry's team that holding an HRH title as an infant somehow entitles a person years later to claim a working royal role if they choose has no precedent, no constitutional basis, and zero support from anyone inside the institution. One friend of William's called it beyond parody. But what gives this story its real weight is not the constitutional absurdity of Harry's claim. It is what that claim reveals about the gap between what Harry and Meghan say and what they actually want. Because they have told the world repeatedly, loudly, and emphatically that they stepped away from royal life because it was damaging to their family, because their children deserved privacy, because the institution was toxic and the scrutiny unbearable. And yet, here is Harry briefing a national newspaper about his children's potential future royal roles. Here is Meghan still using the HRH title she agreed in a formal, legally significant settlement to set aside. The words and the actions do not match. They have not matched for some time, And William, sources say, has been watching that gap grow wider with every passing month.
Markle has been very brazen recently with the use of the HRH. In 2020, during the negotiations for Harry and Meghan to leave royal duties, it was agreed with Queen Elizabeth that they will not use the HRH title. That is a long-standing precedent, and there's good reason for it.
The backstory begins at Sandringham in early 2020, when the late Queen Elizabeth convened what became known as the Sandringham Summit, a remarkable moment where the monarch sat down with her son and both grandsons to negotiate the terms of Harry and Meghan's departure from the team in day, working royal family. The Queen was not a woman who did things lightly. She did it because she trusted Harry, because she believed that if terms were agreed, they would be honoured. The settlement was generous. Harry and Meghan kept their titles, kept their dignity, kept a path back. In return, they agreed to step back from royal duties, and royal sources are emphatic on this point, to stop using the HRH styling entirely. Not just commercially entirely.
King Carl Gustaf of Sweden actually stripped the HRH stylings from his grandchildren from his second and third child. So those 7 kids no longer have an HRH. They still have a prince or princess title. They still have dukedoms, but they don't have that HRH styling because they're not working members of the family, or they will not be.
What happened next is, depending on how much you trust the Sussexes, either a slow drift back into old habits or a systematic and deliberate erosion of a solemn agreement made with a dying queen. Correspondence began going out with the HRH styling attached. The title reappeared in places where it had absolutely no business appearing. When challenged, the Sussex camp reframed the terms the restriction, they now argued, applied only to commercial use. Royal sources say that is simply not true. The deal was clear. The Queen understood it to be clear, and the people around William understood it to be clear. What Meghan has done, in the words of one former courtier speaking to the Daily Beast, is abuse the fact that the late Queen trusted her, and that, more than anything else, is what pushed William from frustration straight into fury. The specific trigger for the current crisis was a report in The Guardian, one that sat almost entirely unnoticed for 10 days before the Daily Beast picked it up and blew it wide open. Tucked inside a broader piece was a claim, sourced directly to Harry's camp, that the Duke of Sussex wants to preserve his children's HRH titles so that when they are old enough, they can decide for themselves whether to become working royals or stay out of public life entirely.
Harry and mostly Meghan, it seems, are actually really obsessed with the titles. Meghan and Harry care a lot about those titles, and they say that they don't, but they clearly do.
This has been Meghan Markle's MO from the beginning. She wants all of the privileges that go along with an identity, but she doesn't want any of the responsibility. She wants the tiara, she doesn't want the public servant.
When that sentence finally reached people close to William, the reaction was not calm or measured. One friend of William's told the Daily Beast, "It is actually hilarious that no one noticed it for 10 days. The idea that a vestigial HRH from infancy later entitles you to a working royal role is beyond parody, even for them." But that laughter faded fast, because beneath the absurdity of the claim lay something that could not be laughed off. Harry and Meghan were operating as though the Sandringham Agreement simply did not exist, as though they could deploy the titles when useful, set them aside when inconvenient, and keep the children's royal identity as a long-term asset to be activated at a moment of their choosing. To those inside the institution, this was not carelessness. This was strategy, slow, patient, and calculated. And it was that strategy that finally, by multiple accounts, pushed William to make his decision. The Daily Beast's reporting is specific. When William becomes king, he is planning to issue new letters patent the same legal mechanism by which HRH titles are granted to formally remove the Sussex family's right to use the styling altogether. It is not without precedent.
When you think about Meghan, I see somebody who's sort of, you could say, cosmopolitan. She doesn't really like the countryside. She doesn't really like to get dirty. She doesn't like to get into the muck. And we see that even when Meghan did a supposed vegetable haul, like they were all perfect, and that she posted on Instagram. And so for me, I think, yes, people can evolve what they enjoy, but Meghan, of course, is hyper focused on the royals. And I think Meghan always feels this massive inferiority complex. And so she's always trying to compete with Catherine in whatever way that she can.
When Diana and Sarah Ferguson lost their HRHs after their respective divorces, there was no dramatic public spectacle. The rules were quietly changed, a modification to letters patent, a legal clarification, clean, constitutional, and essentially impossible to challenge. William, sources say, is planning something very similar, framed as part of a broader modernization of the royal household, a clarification that only working royals are entitled to carry the HRH styling. It would affect multiple members of the extended royal family, not just the Sussexes, which makes it constitutionally defensible and strategically sharp. The Swedish precedent is worth noting here. King Carl Gustaf of Sweden stripped the HRH styling from 7 of his grandchildren on exactly this basis, not as punishment, not as drama, but as a principled clarification of what the royal household actually is and who formally belongs to it. William has spoken often about the need for a leaner, more focused monarchy. What the Sussex situation has done is give that long-held preference a very personal and very urgent edge. Those around him are now quite clear when William becomes king, this will be one of his first acts. Not out of spite, but deliberately because the alternative, allowing a family that has spent 5 years criticizing the institution to keep trading on its titles and identity indefinitely, is, in William's view, no longer acceptable.
Catherine and William are highly engaged parents. We see this reflected, whereas Harry and Meghan, they just give us these little tidbits, and you just gotta wonder, who are the kids with the rest of the time? Because like Link said, Meghan is more than willing to fly off to New York overnight just to go to a play, and most moms don't do that.
The question running beneath all of this, harder to answer, but perhaps more important than the constitutional mechanics, is why the titles matter so much to Harry and Meghan in the first place. They have told us they left because royal life was unbearable. They spoke of the institution in terms ranging from critical to contemptuous. They built an entire public identity around the idea that they are free, liberated from the constraints of royalty, living on their own terms. And yet the HRH remains. The children's royal identities are carefully cultivated and publicly deployed. The brand is named Archwell after a royal connection they claim to have escaped. Everything they do draws value from the very thing they say they fled. The answer, if those who know Meghan well are to be believed, is straightforward. The title is social currency, and in the world Meghan moves through, social currency is everything. It is the one thing she possesses that no amount of money, no television deals, and no lifestyle content can replicate. In the rooms she walks into the celebrity world, the Hollywood circuit, the philanthropic spaces filled with people richer, more famous, and more established, the HRH is the card that opens doors. And the children's royal identity is not just their identity. It is a long-term insurance policy, the thing that keeps the Sussex brand alive not just for this season or the next, but for a decade or more, long past the point where public interest would naturally fade. That is what is at stake, and that is exactly what William is preparing to take away.
Harry and the kids are, of course, going to be traded off that. And so Harry has a lot of opportunity to look forward to this in the future because this is their future. He's basically given up on having any sort of real job. He's not bringing in the money. She kind of sort of is, or attempting to. And so they got nothing. They got nothing but the kids, and to sell the kids basically to the highest bidder, which for Meghan is Instagram.
It would be easy to lose sight of Archie and Lilibet. In all of this, easy to let the constitutional debate, the title dispute, and the Sussex strategy crowd out the simple fact that at the center of this story are 2 very young children who have no say, no vote, and no ability to shape the decisions being made around them. Archie is 6, Lilibet is 3. They did not choose their family, their circumstances, or the extraordinary level of public and commercial interest being attached to their identities before they are old enough to understand what any of it means. There is a contrast here worth sitting with. Prince George is 11, Princess Charlotte is 10, Prince Louis is 7. They too are children at the center of enormous public interest, But the way William and Catherine handle that is so fundamentally different from what is happening in Montecito that the comparison is almost uncomfortable. George, Charlotte, and Louis appear at official engagements as part of the institutional life of the monarchy in an organic, age-appropriate way. Their parents are visibly, physically present, not as directors of content, but as parents. The moments we see are real. The chaos is real. The warmth is real. Compare that to the Father's Day video from Montecito, beautifully produced, carefully timed to land within hours of the Wales family dominating global headlines at Trooping the Colour. The children's appearances edited, curated, and released with the deliberateness of a full PR operation because that is exactly what it was.
The truth about Meghan is she will always find a way in which she thinks she can win. And the casualties are irrelevant, whether it's her father, her old best friends, her first husband. There always will be casualties in her life. The question is, when will Harry become the casualty?
And if the titles are removed, if William's plan proceeds as sources describe, what then? They will grow up without the HRH, without the formal royal styling, without the pathway their father has been trying to keep open. They will have to build their sense of identity in the shadow of the most public and most damaging estrangement in modern royal history, caused not by them, but by decisions made long before they were old enough to walk. That is the inheritance being assembled for them right now, in real time, with every briefing, every broken promise, and every carefully timed piece of content released to pull attention away from the Wales family's effortless grip on the royal story. There is a layer to all of this that goes beyond titles and strategy. It is about the difference between two men, a king who is first a father and a future king who will be first a king. King Charles, by all observable evidence, still holds the door open for Harry, still hopes, somewhere deep down, that the estrangement will end before it becomes something permanent and irreversible. He has been reluctant to act against the Sussexes, reluctant to strip titles, reluctant to do anything that would make reconciliation definitively impossible. The word most often used about Charles in this context is patient. The word most often used about William is furious. Those around William put it plainly: Charles is turning a blind eye. William won't, and that distinction between a father who cannot quite bring himself to shut the door on his youngest son.
Based on one that wants to be out of the public light, doesn't want his children involved, and that's why we see keep them get the back of their heads, and one that's desperate to utilise that and utilise the children.
And a future king who has concluded that keeping the door open is itself the problem, is the central tension driving the Sussex story right now. When Charles is king, the Sussexes operate in the space that his reluctance creates. When William is king, that space will not exist. His fury, those close to him say, is not explosive or impulsive. It is cold, contained, and constitutional, the fury of a man who has made up his mind and is simply waiting for the legal authority to act on it. The titles will go. The only question is when. Step back far enough, and what you see is a pattern that is, by now, entirely predictable. Harry and Meghan make a commitment. They honor it just long enough to avoid immediate consequences. Then they quietly walk it back. Each time, those around William have noted, the breach is slightly larger than the one before. They agreed to step back from royal duties. They continued trading on their royal identity. They agreed to set aside the HRH. Meghan resumed using it. They implied, at least publicly, that their children would be kept private. The children began appearing with increasing regularity in produced content.
As her clout dwindled, as people lost interest in what she and Harry had going on, she was going to move to the next generation. That was the final card she had to play, Archie and Lilibet.
And now comes the working royal briefing, a claim so far beyond the terms of the Sandringham Agreement that it functions less like a negotiating position and more like a direct challenge to the institution itself. One royal source speaking to the Daily Beast put it bluntly: "You cannot trust them. Even if you think you have a deal, you do not really have a deal." And that loss of trust, not new, accumulated over 5 years through every breach, every reframing, and every moment where the institution extended goodwill and received something other than goodwill in return, is at the root of everything happening now. It is why William is not planning to negotiate. It is why there is no reported attempt to reach out to Harry with an ultimatum or an offer. The time for that has passed. What William is planning is not a conversation. It is a conclusion. Pull back to the full picture, and the Sussex trajectory is, by this point, a fairly grim one to trace. The Netflix deal produced content that landed without cultural impact. The Spotify deal collapsed memorably, and in terms that were not flattering. The memoir made enemies far more efficiently than it made friends. The lifestyle brand launched to a muted response. The philanthropic ventures have generated more questions than results, and the couple, by multiple accounts, are not in a good place. Their goals, those who follow them closely report, have quietly but significantly pulled apart. Harry wants something quieter, a version of his life that is smaller, calmer, less relentlessly public. Meghan wants scale, visibility, reinvention, platform. What remains when you strip everything else away is the children and the titles. The children who are being placed with increasing frequency into produced content, the Father's Day video, the carefully framed glimpses, the commercial products carrying their names and their royal association, and the titles which remain the foundational source of value for everything else, the thing that separates Meghan from every other lifestyle influencer and Harry from every other former military officer turned motivational speaker. Remove the titles and the foundation shifts. Remove them permanently, by royal decree, and the commercial structure built on top of them becomes something very different, less exclusive, less irreplaceable, less valuable. William knows this. Those around him know this. And whether Harry and Meghan have fully grasped the strategic implications of what William is reportedly preparing, whether they understand that the Guardian briefing may have triggered the very outcome they have been trying to avoid, is something only they can answer. There is a wider warning woven through this story that reaches far beyond the Sussex family entirely, and it is one worth paying very close attention to, because what is happening here is not just about one couple, one family, or even one monarchy. It is about the nature of the bargain at the heart of royal life, and what happens when that bargain is treated not as something to be honored, but as something to be played, manipulated, and quietly dismantled from the inside. Every member of the royal family operates, whether they consciously think of it this way or not, under the terms of an unspoken agreement that stretches back centuries. The privilege is extraordinary. The restriction is real. You receive a place in the national story, a level of public affection and institutional support that no ordinary life can offer. You receive protection, platform, and prestige on a scale that most people on this planet could not even begin to imagine. And in return, you serve quietly, consistently, without demanding that the service be glamorous or that the recognition be immediate. You do it because that is the bargain, and the bargain is what makes the whole institution work. It is not a perfect system. Nobody serious argues that it is. There are genuine tensions built into royal life, the loss of privacy, the weight of expectation, the impossible standard of being everything to everyone at all times. Those tensions are real, and they are not nothing. People who dismiss them entirely have probably never spent a single day living under that kind of scrutiny. But here is the thing, every single working royal navigates those tensions. Every one of them wakes up and makes the same choice, day after day, to honor the commitment they were born into or married into, because they understand that the privilege and the restriction are two sides of exactly the same coin. You do not get to keep one and discard the other. That is not how the bargain works. That has never been how the bargain works. Harry was raised inside that bargain from the very first day of his life. By all credible accounts, he understood it, and for a significant and meaningful part of his adult life, he honored it genuinely. He served in the military, not once but twice, including a combat deployment that was real and dangerous and carried out without complaint. He built charitable work that had genuine impact. He showed up, consistently and without drama, to the quiet, unglamorous work of being a working royal, and the public loved him for it deeply, warmly, and without reservation. And then he left, which, taken purely on its own terms, is something the institution could perhaps have absorbed over time. People have stepped back before. people have found the pressure unbearable and chosen a quieter life. The institution is older and more resilient than any single member of it, and it has survived departures before. But what it could not absorb, what William, by all accounts, finds genuinely and completely unforgivable, is not the leaving itself. It is what came after the leaving. It is the leaving combined with the continued taking, the walking away while keeping the benefits, the very loud and very public rejection of the obligations, paired with the very quiet and very deliberate clutching of every privilege those obligations came with. The attacking of the institution in interviews, in a memoir, on a globally distributed podcast, while simultaneously and without any apparent sense of contradiction, briefing national newspapers about the children's future royal roles. That combination, exit plus exploitation, departure plus dependency, is what has made this situation genuinely irrecoverable in the eyes of those around William. And it is what has transformed William's response from frustration into something colder, more determined, and far more strategically dangerous for the Sussexes. Because William is not angry in the way that leads people to make reckless decisions, those close to him are consistent on this point. His fury is not hot and impulsive, it is cold and constitutional. It is the fury of a man who has watched the same pattern repeat itself 5 times, 6 times, 7 times the commitment made, the commitment honored just long enough to avoid consequences, and then the quiet, deliberate walk back, and has finally concluded that the pattern will not change on its own. It has to be changed by force, legal, constitutional, unchallengeable force. And when William becomes king, that is exactly what sources say he is preparing to deliver. New letters patent, a formal, legal, permanent removal of the HRH styling from the entire Sussex family. Not a conversation, not a negotiation, not an ultimatum with a deadline attached, a conclusion clean, constitutional, and final. Now, some people will hear that and feel uncomfortable, and that discomfort is worth taking seriously for a moment, because it is not entirely without basis. There is something that feels instinctively harsh about the idea of titles being removed, of doors being permanently closed, of a family being formally and legally separated from an identity they have carried since birth or since marriage. But here is what those who support William's position would say, and they say it with considerable force. The Sussexes have had 5 years. 5 years of goodwill extended, of terms agreed and then quietly rewritten, of institutions and individuals bending over backwards to find a path that worked for everyone. 5 years of the palace absorbing public attacks while privately keeping every option open. 5 years of Charles, motivated by a father's love for his youngest son, refusing to take the steps that would make reconciliation definitively impossible. And in those 5 years, what has changed? The breaches have gotten larger, the claims have gotten bolder. The gap between what the Sussexes say publicly and what they do privately has grown wider with every passing month. The working royal briefing the claim that Archie and Lilibet should have the option to become working royals based on titles they hold as infants is not a minor overreach. It is a direct challenge to the fundamental terms of the Sandringham Agreement, delivered not in a private conversation but through a national newspaper. At some point, those who defend William's position argue patience stops being a virtue and starts being a problem. At some point, the open door stops being an act of generosity and becomes an invitation for continued exploitation. William, it appears, has concluded that that point has been reached, and when he has the constitutional authority to act on that conclusion, he will. The Sussex trajectory, viewed from the outside, has a quality that is almost difficult to watch. Not because of schadenfreude, though there are certainly people who feel that, but because of the sheer gap between what was promised and what has been delivered, and between what was claimed and what has actually happened. The Netflix deal produced content that arrived and departed without leaving a meaningful cultural mark. The Spotify deal ended in terms that were described by those inside the industry as deeply unflattering. The memoir, which burned bridges at a rate and with a thoroughness that shocked even seasoned royal watchers, made enemies with extraordinary efficiency and friends with considerably less. the lifestyle brand launched to a response that could most charitably be described as muted. The philanthropic work, which was supposed to be the moral backbone of the Sussex reinvention, has generated questions about structure, impact, and accountability that have never been fully answered. And, through all of it, the one constant, the one thing that has never wavered, never been set aside, never been genuinely relinquished, is the royal connection, the titles, the identity. The brand value that flows directly and entirely from the institution they left and have spent 5 years criticizing. That is not an accident. That is a strategy. And it is a strategy that William, sources say, has been watching with increasing clarity and increasing fury for years. There is something else worth examining here too, something that does not get discussed enough in the broader conversation about the Sussexes, and that is the question of what all of this actually looks like from the inside of the relationship itself. Because multiple accounts from people who follow both Harry and Meghan closely and with genuine access, I suggest that the picture inside Montecito is considerably more complicated than the unified front presented to the outside world. Harry, by these accounts, wants something quieter, something smaller, a life with less relentless public exposure, less constant positioning, less of the grinding machinery of brand management and content production and strategic media placement. He misses, those who know him say, something simpler, and the gap between the life he imagined when he left and the life he is actually living has become something he carries visibly and with increasing weight. Meghan, by the same accounts, wants the opposite: scale, visibility, reinvention on the largest possible stage, a platform that rivals and eventually surpasses the one she left. She is not a woman who thinks small, and there is nothing inherently wrong with that. Ambition is not a character flaw. But when two people in the same partnership are pulling in fundamentally opposite directions, the strain becomes real, and those around them say it has. What holds it all together, what functions as the load-bearing wall of the entire Sussex structure, is the children and the titles. The children, who are appearing with increasing frequency in carefully produced content, their images and their royal association deployed with the precision of a marketing operation. And the titles, which remain, despite everything, the single most valuable asset the Sussexes possess, the thing that no business deal, no streaming contract, and no lifestyle brand can manufacture or replace. Remove the titles, and the foundation of that entire structure shifts in ways that cannot be fully predicted, but can certainly be imagined. The brand becomes less exclusive, the access becomes less automatic, the doors that open because of the HRH become doors that require a different key, one that the Sussexes may find considerably harder to obtain. William knows this. Those around him know this. And the question of whether Harry and Meghan have fully understood the strategic implications of what William is preparing, whether they have grasped that the Guardian briefing may have been the move that finally triggered the outcome they have spent 5 years trying to avoid, is one that only they can answer. But perhaps the most important question in all of this, the one that sits underneath the constitutional mechanics and the brand strategy and the palace politics, is the simplest one. What is this actually doing to the people at the center of it? Not Harry and Meghan, who are adults and who have made their choices with full awareness of the consequences, or at least with the opportunity to have that awareness. But Archie and Lilibet, 6 years old and 3 years old, with no vote, no voice, and no ability to protect themselves from the decisions being made in their names, about their identities, and with their futures as the stated justification, those children will grow up. They will reach an age where they can read, where they can search, where they can find every article, every briefing, every piece of produced content in which their images and their royal titles were deployed as strategic assets before they were old enough to understand what any of it meant. They will have to make sense of an estrangement they did not cause, a public identity they did not choose, and a family rupture so deep and so public that it has become one of the defining stories of the early 21st century. That is the inheritance being assembled for them in real time, with every briefing, every broken promise, every carefully timed content drop, and every legal maneuver being planned in palaces and lawyers' offices on both sides of the Atlantic. And whatever you think of their parents, whatever position you hold on the constitutional questions or the brand strategy or the palace politics, those children deserve better than to be the justification for decisions that are really about something else entirely. There is a final thought worth sitting with before we close. The institution of the monarchy has survived things that, at the time, seemed unsurvivable. It has absorbed abdications, scandals, divorces, and departures. It has bent and adapted and modernized without losing the essential thing that makes it what it is. It is, in the most literal sense, built to last. And the Sussex situation, dramatic and damaging and endlessly fascinating as it is, will not break it. What William is reportedly preparing is not an act of desperation. It is an act of institutional maintenance, the kind of clear-eyed, unsentimental decision-making that strong institutions require in order to remain strong. The bargain must mean something. The titles must reflect reality. The gap between what is claimed and what is true must eventually be closed. When William becomes king, sources say he will close it, permanently, legally, and without looking back. So here are two questions worth sitting with because they matter more than any constitutional detail we have covered, and your take on this genuinely matters. First, do you believe William should act? And if he does, do you think it will finally bring real clarity to a situation that has dragged on unresolved and increasingly damaging for the better part of 5 years? Because clarity, whatever form it takes, is surely better than the endless, grinding uncertainty that everyone involved has been living with since Sandringham. And second, what about Archie and Lilibet? Two very young children at the absolute center of all of this, with no agency and no voice of their own. Whatever your feelings about their parents, whatever side of this debate you land on, what do those children actually deserve? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Every single one gets read, and this community never fails to bring honest, sharp perspectives to these conversations. Your insight genuinely makes these discussions worth having. If this video was worth your time, hit that like button. It makes a real difference and helps more people find their way here. Subscribe if you have not already, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. If you know someone who follows this story closely, share this one with them. These are exactly the conversations worth having together. See you in the next one. Take very good care.